Welcome to Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne. I'm Evan Green. I'm the firearms historian for the museum. And this is part 2 of a series about the evolution of Winchester lever-action rifles. And this is subtitled The Genius of John Browning, because John Browning was the designer responsible for the 4 firearms that we're going to look at today. The first one is this one. It is a model Winchester 1886, and it corrected the shortcomings of the early toggle action rifles that we discussed in the previous video, and was less sensitive to the overall length of the cartridge, so it could be chambered in 45-70. This one is chambered in 40-82, and this is just an amazing, nice example of an 1886 Winchester. It has this tang sight, which was probably aftermarket, but it still has the original receiver or barrel sight here. And again, just a very, very good condition. And what made this one really much stronger is this system of locking bolts. So when the lever is operated, you can see this bolt here, and there's one on the other side also. So they're in a pair, and when the action is closed, they lock up really tight. It's a very strong action because these 2 bars butt against the rear of the frame. So it's a very strong, very secure action. And again, this one is just a very, very nice example of an 1886 Winchester. Again, one of the first, well, actually the second collaboration between John Browning and the Winchester Company. The first was an 1885 single-shot rifle that John Browning designed and Winchester eventually produced. This is the next rifle in the series designed by John Browning, and again, a very, very nice example. This is a Winchester model 1892, and it is kind of a reversion to the pistol caliber cartridges that were popular in the toggle length series of Winchesters. But if you look, it has that same locking system as the 1886, so it's a very, very strong action. And these were available in some of the same calibers as the 1873 Winchester, 44-40, 38-40, 32-20. This one happens to be in 25-20. So again, a John Browning design, a collaboration with Winchester. And if you think you might recognize this outline of the rifle, a model 1892 Winchester carbine was used by John Wayne in lots of his movies, even if the period being portrayed was years before the 1882 was developed. And his often had this big loop lever down here, but it was a model 1882. This is a Winchester model 1894. And it is probably one of the most popular sporting firearms in existence. There were over 6 million model 1894s made between 1894 and when Winchester went out of business. But they're still made today, but they're made by Morku in Japan. And there are also replicas made by some of the Italian makers, replicas of the 1894. This one is a carbine and was used by the guards at the Wyoming Frontier Prison and was donated along with about a dozen of its fellows when that institution closed. So again, 1894, lots of them made, lots of different calibers. It was, in fact, the first sporting firearm that was designed for smokeless powder, the famous 30-30 Winchester. When the
model was introduced in 1894, it was available in 2 old black powder cartridges. 3855 was one. I don't recall the other. It was a 40-something. And so the 3030 in smokeless powder was not introduced, capable of handling smokeless powder was not introduced until 1895. The 3030 was first, followed shortly by the 2535, which was basically the 3030 cartridge, neck down to take a 25 caliber bullet. My dad was a big fan of the 2535. He had one of the rifles and as well as a carbine in 2535. So that's the Model 94. And the last one, the last lever action collaboration between John Browning and Winchester is this heavily used and abused model of 1895. And this one is unique because it does not have that tubular magazine under the barrel, but rather has a stacked magazine here enclosed by this piece. And why that is important is, if you will recall, I talked about the dangers of a tubular magazine with pointed bullets. You can't really use a pointed bullet in a tubular magazine because that pointed bullet rests on the primer of the cartridge ahead of it in the magazine. Now, they've recently, I don't know how recent, but it's been around for a while, is a cartridge with a polymer tip. So you can use those with some caution in a tubular magazine. But this one allowed the use of spire-pointed bullets which have a better ballistic coefficient. They are more efficient after they leave the muzzle than a round-nosed or flat-nosed bullet. So, model of 1895. Theodore Roosevelt called this his big medicine for lions, and he took it on safari to Africa. From what I've heard, is that in those major calibers, I think the largest one was a .401 Winchester, that it had brutal recoil, particularly with this curved steel rifle butt plate. So that's the evolution of Winchester lever actions. Thank you for watching.